The woods have always unsettled me. Not because of the animals or the darkness, but because of what happened that one weekend. My fear is a direct scar from the story I am about to share. As a teenager, I loved camping and hiking. I remember counting down the days until the weekend when my parents would let me take the SUV up to our family SUV up cabin. Or if I was really lucky, my best friend David's cabin, which was much deeper in the mountains. I was 17, and this was supposed to be the highlight of our summer break. Me, David, and our mutual friend Eric were going to spend 3 days completely unsupervised at David's cabin near Blackwood Lake. Eric was the oldest and had a fake ID, so we were fully stocked with beer. The drive up was incredible. We had the windows down, music blasting, feeling like we owned the world. We arrived at the cabin just before sunset and immediately started unloading the car. The layout of the property is crucial for you to understand what happened. The cabin sits in a small clearing surrounded by dense pine trees. There's a main front porch, a back door that leads to a small shed where David, his dad, kept his tools, and an ATV, and a gravel driveway that winds for about a mile before hitting the main road. The most important detail is that the living room has a massive floor-to-ceiling window that faces the tree line, giving you a perfect view of the forest edge. We were at that age where we felt invincible. A cabin all to ourselves, alcohol, and no parents. We spent the first few hours just hanging out, drinking beers, and talking about girls. We had invited a couple of girls from our high school to drive up and meet us later that night. Things were going great. We built a fire in the fireplace, cracked open a few more drinks, and waited for the girls to text us that they were close. Around midnight, the atmosphere changed. We were sitting in the living room, the fire dying down, just joking around. Suddenly, David stopped laughing and stood up, walking slowly toward the big glass window. He squinted into the darkness of the tree line. I asked him what was wrong, thinking he was just trying to scare us. He didn't answer right away. He just whispered that he thought he saw a flashlight beam sweep across the trees, about 50 yards out. I laughed it off. "It's probably just a ranger or a hunter," I said. But David shook his head. He knew his property lines. We were miles from the nearest neighbor, and it wasn't hunting season. To prove him wrong, Eric walked up to the window and cupped his hands against the glass to block out the reflection. The mood in the room dropped to zero instantly. Eric stumbled back from the window, his face pale. "Turn off the lights," he hissed. We killed the lights immediately, plunging the cabin into darkness, lit only by the dying embers of the fireplace. We all crouched near the window, peering out. My heart stopped. At the edge of the forest, exactly where the trees met the clearing, there were silhouettes. Not just one, 3 of them. They were standing perfectly still, just outside the reach of the cabin's porch light. They weren't moving. They weren't talking. They were just staring directly at the cabin. "Are those the girls?" David asked, his voice trembling. I pulled out my phone. No texts, no service. The realization hit us hard. Those weren't the girls. The figures were too tall, too broad. Suddenly, one of the figures raised an arm and pointed directly at us. Even in the dark, I felt like they could see us hiding behind the glass. Then, in unison, they started walking. Not running, but walking with a terrifying .com purpose across the clearing, toward the front door. "Lock it. Lock everything," David screamed. We scrambled. Eric sprinted to the back door to check the deadbolt while David and I threw the heavy latch on the front door. We backed away into the hallway, grabbing fireplace, pokers, and a heavy flashlight as weapons. We were terrified teenagers, intoxicated and completely out of our depth. A heavy thud echoed from the front porch. Then the doorknob jiggled violently. They were trying to get in. We held our breath, waiting for the sound of shattering glass, expecting them to break that big living room window. But the noise stopped. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. Minutes passed, and we heard nothing. No footsteps, no voices, just the wind in the pines. Eric whispered that maybe they gave up, maybe they were just messing with us. But then, we heard a sound coming from the back of the property, a metallic screeching noise. "The shed," David gasped. The shed was detached from the house, about 20 feet from the back door. That's where David's dad kept his prized possession, a fully restored vintage Land Rover Defender. It was his baby. He worked on it every weekend. We heard the distinct sound of the shed doors being pried open, followed by the roar of an engine turning over. They weren't trying to kill us. They were robbing us. But fear kept us. None of us were brave enough to run out that back door to stop 3 grown men. We heard the Land Rover peel out of the shed, tires crunching on the gravel, and then fading away down the long driveway. As soon as the sound of the engine was gone, we didn't wait. We sprinted to my car, threw our stuff in, and drove down that mountain faster than I have ever driven in my life. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town with a police station. The police went back to the cabin to investigate, but the place was empty. The shed lock was busted, and the Land Rover was gone. David's dad was devastated. The police found tire tracks indicating a trailer had been waiting down on the main road. It was a calculated theft. They had probably been watching the cabin for days, waiting for a moment when the security system was off or when they knew someone was there to open the gate, but too weak to stop them. The thieves were never caught. The Land Rover was never found. It vanished into thin air. David, Eric, and I drifted apart after high school. The trauma of that night creating a weird wedge between us. I hadn't thought about that Land Rover in 10 years. I assumed it was chopped up for parts or shipped overseas. But recently, I ran into David at a wedding. It was awkward at first, but after a few drinks, we started talking about the old days. Eventually, the conversation turned to the cabin. David got quiet, looked around to make sure no one was listening, and told me something that made the hair on my arms stand up. He had an update, and it was worse than the original robbery. David told me that his younger brother, Sam, who is now 20 years old, is an avid urban explorer. He likes hiking in places he isn't supposed to be, abandoned quarries, closed-off trails, that sort of thing. About 6 months ago, Sam and 2 friends decided to hike deep into the Grizzly Peak Wilderness area. For context, Grizzly Peak is a massive stretch of forest about 50 miles north of where the cabin incident happened. Parts of it are restricted government land, mostly old logging roads that haven't been used in decades. It's desolate. Sam and his friends hiked in about 10 miles, planning to camp illegally near an old dried-up riverbed. They set up camp and, around sunset, decided to explore a dense patch of forests where they saw something reflecting the sunlight earlier that day. They pushed through the brush and stumbled into a small, natural clearing that wasn't on any map. In the center of the clearing was a structure, a makeshift shelter built out of tops and logs, and parked right next to it, half covered by a camouflage net, was a vehicle. Sam froze. He recognized the custom grill guard and the specific shade of green paint immediately. He walked closer, his heart pounding. He checked the rear bumper. There was a small dent on the left side, a dent David had made when he was learning to drive stick shift 15 years ago. It was the stolen Land Rover. It had been missing for a decade, and here it was, sitting in the middle of nowhere, 50 miles away from the crime scene. Sam wanted to take a picture to send to David, but his phone was back at their campsite. His friends urged him to leave. The vibe of the place was wrong. It didn't look abandoned. It looked lived in. There were fresh tire tracks in the mud, and a pile of firewood that had recently been chopped. Sam argued that they should try to hotwire it and take it back, seeing it as some heroic retrieval. But while they were arguing in hushed tones, they heard a sound coming from the other side of the clearing. Digging. The rhythmic sound of a shovel hitting dirt. Enchika, Tomp. Enchika, Tomp. Sam signaled his friends to get down. They crawled through the tall grass toward the edge of the clearing to see who was there. Through the gaps in the trees, they saw a man. He was huge, wearing dirty coveralls. He was standing waist deep in a hole he was digging. David told me that Sam swore the man wasn't burying trash. Next to the hole was a long, heavy-looking bag wrapped in black plastic. The shape was unmistakable. Sam and his friends were paralyzed with fear, just like we had been 10 years prior. But then, one of Sam's friends stepped on a dry branch. The snap echoed through the clearing like a gunshot. The digging stopped instantly. The man in the hole went completely still. He didn't turn around immediately. He just slowly lifted his head, sniffing the air like a predator. Then, he vaulted out of the hole with terrifying speed and grabbed the shovel. "Run," Sam whispered. They bolted, They didn't care about the noise anymore. They sprinted back through the brush, tearing their clothes on thorns, falling over roots. Behind them, they could hear the heavy, crashing footsteps of the man pursuing them. He wasn't yelling. It was silent, which made it infinitely scarier. They made it back to their campsite, grabbed their keys, and ran for their car parked miles down the logging road. They didn't stop to pack up their tents or sleeping bags. They left everything behind. Sam drove like a maniac down the mountain. He kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see the headlights of the Land Rover chasing him down, but it never came. When Sam got home, he was a wreck. He told David everything. David told him to go to the police, but Sam refused. He was trespassing on restricted government land, drinking underage, and leaving trash their campsite in a protected area. Plus, he was terrified that the man had seen their faces. David eventually tipped off the rangers anonymously about a squatter in that area, giving them the coordinates. A week later, he checked the local news. The rangers had raided the camp. They found the makeshift shelter and the stolen Land Rover. The vehicle was recovered and returned to David's dad, surprisingly intact. But the man was gone. And the hole. The report said they found a hole that had been recently filled back in. When they dug it up, it was empty. Whatever or whoever was in that black bag had been moved. David's dad sold the Land Rover a week later. He couldn't look at it. He said it smelled like rot inside. To this day, Sam refuses to go camping. And hearing that story, realizing that the people who watched us through the window that night might be the same kind of people, digging holes in the deep woods. Let's just say I keep my doors locked now, no matter where I am.